I have a very city phone call at noon. I'll be on this, but I'm going to mute myself and take a call. Is that all right?
Fine.
Okay.
Yeah, we're going to start the meeting right now, and we're recording. So everyone mind your P's and Q's. All right, so good morning. Hereby call to order the regularly scheduled RCHCA Board of Directors meeting at this time. We're going to, I'm going to give you a little disclosure here first, and then we're going to take the Pledge of Allegiance. This meeting is being held during a proclaimed state of emergency declared by the Governor of the State of California. As a result of the emergency declaration, a meeting in person would present an imminent risk to the health or safety of the attendees, and therefore this body elects to hold the meeting virtually. Before we continue this meeting, this body needs to vote to approve to hold the meeting virtually. Janice, will you please conduct that roll call vote?
Absolutely. City of Corona.
Here.
That's a yes. We're voting on to hold this meeting virtually. If you could.
I'm a yes.
Okay.
Thank you. City of Hemet.
Jackie Peterson here.
I just need a yes or no, but yes.
Yes.
City of Lake Elsinore.
Yes.
Menifee.
Yes.
Moreno Valley.
Yes.
Murrieta. Harris.
Yes.
Riverside. Temecula. Temecula is joining us now. I'll come back to him. Wildomar.
Yes.
And County of Riverside. Thank you. Mr. Stewart, can you hear us?
Yes.
Okay, we added the item to the agenda to allow for a remote meeting due to the claimed state of emergency, and we are taking a roll call vote for the board of directors to allow this meeting to occur via Zoom. So if you could please give your vote as to that allowance, I would appreciate it.
Yes.
Thank you, sir. That concludes the roll call vote for that, Mr. Chair, and it passes unanimously.
Thank you very much. The meeting will conclude virtually. We're going to move on to the Pledge of Allegiance. Would you all please rise and join us in pledging allegiance to the greatest flag on God's green earth. Right hand over your heart. Ready to begin. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you very much. You may be seated. Now we're going to conduct the roll call. Janice, you have the floor.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. When I call your jurisdiction, please state your name, City of Corona.
Tom Richards here.
And then
Jackie Peterson.
Lake Elsinore,
Steve Manos.
Menifee,
Lisa Sobek.
Moreno Valley,
Linda Bernard.
Murrieta, Harris,
Michael Vargas.
Riverside, Temecula,
James Stewart.
Wildomar,
Joseph Morabito.
and County of Riverside. Thank you. That concludes roll call, and we have quorum.
Very good. We're going to move on to item number 4, public comments. This time, members of the public can address the board regarding any item within the matter of the jurisdiction of the board and any item that is also not listed separately under the agenda. Members of the public will have an opportunity to address items that are listed on the agenda separately at the time when those items are called. No action may be taken on any item that is not on the agenda unless authorized by law. And whenever possible, lengthy testimony should be presented to the board in writing and on pertinent points. Time is of the essence. Madam Clerk, do we have any requests to speak from the public at this time?
I see no requests.
Okay. That moves us on to the consent calendar. All items under the consent calendar are considered to be routine items and may be enacted on in one motion. Prior to the motion to consider any action by the board, are there any public comments on any of the items in the consent calendar?
I see no requests.
No requests. Do any members of the board wish to pull any of the items on the consent agenda? Hearing none, we're going to take a roll call vote. Any roll call vote, please.
Can I get a motion to approve the consent calendar, please?
City of Menifee, move.
Paris seconds.
Thank you very much.
All right, let's conduct that roll call.
City of Corona,
Tom Richards, yes.
Hammett,
Yes.
Lake Elsinore,
Yes.
Menifee,
Yes,
Moreno Valley,
Yes.
Marietta, Paris,
Yes.
Riverside, Temecula,
Yes.
Willamar,
yes,
County of Riverside. Thank you. That concludes the roll call vote for those items, and they pass unanimously.
Very much. Moves us to item number 6, reports and discussion. Members of the public will have an opportunity to speak on agendized items at the time of the item that is called for discussion. Item 6A, status update on the Stevens kangaroo rat recovery efforts. If the presentation will be conducted by RCHCA's Brian Shomo regarding the species recovery effort for the Stevens kangaroo rat. Brian?
Thank you, Chairman Manos. As you stated, 6A is just a quick status update on our recovery efforts going since the last meeting. We've talked about it before. 2024 will continue to conduct a range-wide population assessment of SKR. It'll be the 3rd year, and I think we've mentioned this several times already, but it'll be an interesting year because it'll add that 3rd data point to our graph to document the trends. If you recall in the last meeting when Dr. Spencer gave his presentation, he noted that there was a decline from the first year of monitoring 2022 to 2023. And what he didn't say, and what maybe we should have mentioned, and I want to clarify it here, is although there was a decline to 34% occupancy, meaning that 34% of the areas we surveyed had SKR, that percentage of occupancy is actually still higher than the Western Riverside. Multiple species have that conservation species objective plan for SKR, which requires at least a 30% occupancy on conserved land. So although it's declined, we're still above our threshold and requirement for our region. The other threshold that the MSHCP has for Stevens kangaroo rat is that of that 30%, it has to be at least 5 to 10 individuals per hectare, which is considered medium to high density. And so although not a truly accurate way to estimate density, our sampling grid is about 1/4 of a hectare. And so if you multiply that by 4, we average about 3 animals per our sampling grid. So we're about 12 animals per hectare, which again is still considered medium to high density, substantially higher than the MSHCP species objective. So I just want to, I don't know if we left you with a kind of a feeling of decline and that, that we're going in the wrong direction. But in fact, we expected that decline, and that decline still is higher than the species objective is for our region. So we're still doing really good, which brings me to the main focus of this agenda item. And so we confirmed with U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service that they're waiting for the region to send down the list of species for the 5-year status review in fiscal year 24-25. That list is supposed to contain Stevens kangaroo rat. So we anticipate conducting some legislative and agency outreach efforts this year. Probably at the next meeting in May, we'll ask for volunteers from the board members who may want to accompany us to not only regional in Sacramento, U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, CDFW, but maybe even perhaps to Washington, D.C. to meet with some of our federal legislative representatives to just bring them aware of what is at stake, kind of update them on where we've gone in the last 5 years, some of the achievements that we've had in the last 30 years, but also a lot of the information that we've compiled in since the last status review in an effort to convince them that delisting or full recovery is imminent and hopefully done within the next few years. So that's where we're at. Again, we also want to start thinking about how we address the long-term funding of this monitoring program. Any delisting or recovery will include a long-term monitoring plan. I don't know if the RCHCA is that vehicle to do that in perpetuity. The idea that we've been kicking around with some of our conservation partners like DOD, U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, BLM, is perhaps to each of us contribute a decent amount of money to put into a kind of a central bucket of funding source that we could then hire somebody to maintain the level of effort needed in perpetuity, whether that's RCHCA or a private contractor or some other entity, BLM, is yet to be decided. But the idea would be that no one entity would carry this burden going, forever. And so that's the idea. But we're open to other ideas, other suggestions. But that's just one of the things that was brought up at the last status review. We need to maintain this level of effort at some point going forward. So we'll discuss that as well. But we will be conducting again, some outreach efforts. We'll put together some talking points, some brochures, and then again at May meeting, we'll probably ask for interested board members who not only are interested, but also have the time available to commit to this effort. So we want to keep that at a relatively small group, but there is room for several board members to accompany us on these outreach efforts. And so that, next slide. And so this is the kind of the outline where we're at, just for some of the new board members who weren't with us at the last 5-year status review. So you'll see across the top there, what is the RCHCA's responsibility? The U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service in the middle column there is what we went through to downlist the species, what they went through to downlist the species to threatened status in 2019. And then on the far right is just what we're beginning to do in 24-25. It's very similar to what we did in 2019. There's a 5-factor analysis. Once the status species is up for a status review, the main focus is the 5-factor analysis the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service conducts. And basically, it's a fact-finding mission. They gather all the data they can. They try to identify the 5 factors, which include habitat loss, overutilization, whether that's commercial or even scientific uses of the species that are impacting it, whether there's any disease or predation or other threats that are new that pose a threat to its imminent extinction or a relisting of endangerment, or can we move ahead and have we mitigated those threats? The other things include inadequate existing regulations. I don't think that's relevant to this. There's plenty of regulations overseeing Endangered Species Act, the HCPs, that kind of thing. And then any other factors is the final category for that. And that's kind of a catch-all, as you can imagine. But hopefully there's no surprises here. We've been doing this for quite some time. The thing that the RCHCA wants to concentrate on, we continue to work with all of our conservation folks in the working groups that we've assembled over the years. We are in a process at CBI, if you've seen the last meeting, we've asked to revamp and update the habitat suitability model, which shows us where SKR can be found throughout our region. And we're now in the 3rd year, like I said, doing the range-wide monitoring protocol. The only thing really left is the genetic study. And so we've been working with the San Diego Zoo's Wildlife Alliance in the past to do a genetic analysis. We want to include the genetic analysis in our ongoing monitoring efforts as we go across the range. The problem with the current methodology is that it requires actively taking tissue samples. And by tissue samples, biologists need to be trained on how to snip a small chunk of their ear out and without harming the animal. So it takes a level of dexterity and expertise to do it. And that's not sufficient for a range-wide protocol where you don't have people with 15, 20 years of SKR monitoring experience conducting the work. And so the idea is to basically take hair pulls where you remove the follicle and along with the hair. And can we use the hair follicle to do the same kind of a genetic analysis to see where the population is going, any barriers to their dispersal, that kind of thing. And so we recently worked with the San Diego Zoo's folks to update that protocol. They're now working on a proposal to do the analysis, and we're trying to define the objectives and all the deliverables with it. But I think in the next, by the next board meeting, we should have that all finalized and moving forward. So all of our ducks are in a row. The pump has been primed, and we should be in good shape moving forward in 24-25 for the next status review of SKR. So with that, that concludes my presentation. Next slide. I'll be happy to take any questions. This is a receive and file.
Very good. Thank you, Brian. We're going to go to the public first. If there's any requests to speak by the public, Madam Clerk Leonard?
No, sir.
All right. And there's nobody else in the room, just for the record here. So we're going to move on to board members with any questions or comments. Is there anybody want to raise their hand or use the raise hand function to go ahead and indicate that they'd like to speak?
I see no requests.
Well, seeing no one raising their hand or just unmuting their microphone to speak, can we, this is a receive and file action, so we do not need to take a vote on it. That's going to move us forward to item 6B. Item 6B is an update by RCHCA's Brianna Fisher regarding the Steel Peak Public Access Plan. Brianna, you have the floor.
Thank you, Chair Manos. Next slide, please. So I just wanted to provide the board with an update on the Steel Peak Public Access Plan. First, I want to provide a bit of a background since it's been a while and we have some board members who are unfamiliar with this plan. So back in 2020, in response to the board's directive under our prior executive director's leadership, a pilot public access plan was crafted for Steel Peak. Steel Peak is one of our smaller reserves solely owned by the RCHCA. The rationale behind the plan was to introduce controlled and limited public access, thought to dissuade illegal entry and thereby enhancing SKR habitat while providing a community recreational resource. In December 2020, RCHCA secured a $609,000 grant from the California Natural Resources Agency to establish the public access trail. Subsequently, in 2021, Alta Planning and Design completed the Steel Peak Reserve's trail design plan, and Ruth Villalobos and Associates conducted a CEQA initial study, and a mitigated negative declaration was declared on the trail. Next slide, please. So the Steel Peak Trail is only allowable within a core reserve if it is deemed a public facility under the RCHCA and implementation agreement and compatible with the maintenance of biological resources in the core reserve. Therefore, concurrence is required from both the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service and the California Department of Fish and Wildlife in order to move forward with the trail's construction. Over the past 4 years, our staff have engaged in discussions with the wildlife agencies to address the trail's compliance with the RCHCA and the IA. However, the agencies delayed providing their response letter until February 1st of this year. So regrettably, the agencies expressed disagreement with our council's classification of the trail as a public facility and deemed it inconsistent with the conservation goals of the reserve. They included that if RCHCA wishes to include the trail as a public facility, the project would need to include all reasonable avoidance measures after consultation with the wildlife agencies and to, of course, mitigate at a 1-to-1 ratio for impacts to occupied SKR habitat. Additionally, they outlined a series of required actions, including mitigation measures, SKR baseline surveys with continuous monitoring, and a revised reserve management plan to include public access with justification for the change in the conservation and management strategy, which would trigger additional CEQA processes. These actions would entail significant costs and time with no guarantee of the wildlife agency's approval or concurrence. So considering the implications, the benefits and risks, our staff recommends not pursuing the trail project further at this time. We respectfully request that the board discuss and determine the most appropriate course of action, taking into account regulatory compliance, feasibility, and the strategic implications of the trail's advancement. If the board does wish to pursue the trail's advancement, a feasibility study would be recommended in order to determine the costs associated with the wildlife agency's required actions. Next slide, please. And this concludes my report. We are again asking the board to make a determination of the most appropriate course of action. And I'm happy to address any questions or concerns from the board at this time.
Thank you, Rihanna. Do we have any members of the public that wish to speak on this item?
No, sir.
This is the time for us to discuss and debate this item. Do any of the board members wish to make any comments?
We have board member Morabito, followed by Sobek, followed by Jeff Green of the Supervisor Jeffrey's office.
Agency member Morabito, go for it.
Well, I have to say this is very disappointing. I mean, all this time that we've put towards, getting some of these lands open to the public, and they basically said no. Not that it, I did have a question about how much staff time and agency money has been put to this effort so far. Do we have even ballpark guesses?
So we did complete the Alta Trail Plan design. I believe that was roughly $50,000 to do. And then we had a contract with Ruth Villalobos and Associates to conduct the CEQA study. I would need to go back through my records on that amount. But I would estimate probably about $100,000 to $120,000 has been spent already.
And I'm one who doesn't subscribe to throwing good money after bad money. If the money's gone, it's gone. But that is really discouraging I don't know, that's my thought. What can I tell you?
It is.
Councilmember Morbido, I feel the same way. And I'm sure staff feels the same way. We worked a lot on this. Staff worked a lot on it. Didn't we receive a grant for this? And how will that work?
We did. We received a grant in 2020 for $609,000, which has just been kind of pending from the California Natural Resources Agency. That money was to build the actual trail for construction and things like that. So it doesn't unfortunately cover the money that we've already spent for the design plan and for CEQA. It's just strictly for the construction of the trail. So
will it be returned?
it would be returned if we did not continue the funds. However, if we do decide to do this trail in the future, CNRA did say that the money would still be there until we're ready for it.
Okay, so it is disappointing, and I just see that it's what's sad is that this was an area where they had nothing at all. And I know it was that, that rural community county area that was going to benefit from something like this. So under the circumstances, I would say for myself that it might be good to put it on hold right now. And as Mr. Brian Sherrill shared, that we're going to have to look at some other important things coming up about the SKR and continue how this will be needed to be funded for future. So my recommendation would be to hold off on this right now.
Thank you.
Mr. Chair, a couple of things I would like to announce that Councilmember John Lavelle from the city of Murrieta has joined us. He is the new alternate for the city of Murrieta. Additionally, we have Jeff Green, who has his hand raised, Mayor Vargas, and Dr. Wilson. Jeff, I assume, is representing Supervisor Jeffrey's office as the alternate.
Go on, Jeff.
So technically, we are no longer the alternate. I tried to get my hand up while it was still public comment, but I am speaking on behalf of Supervisor Jeffries, who was the alternate. And when this was proposed, and I participated in quite a few of the meetings early on this project, including some with the Fish and Wildlife folks, and it was incredibly frustrating. They appeared outright hostile in several of the meetings. The supervisor was very disappointed to see this recommendation from them. He understands your recommendation, that it's not worth pursuing if they're just going to put up roadblocks, but to basically deny public access to public lands is, for him, just an outrageous decision by the feds here. Thank you.
Mayor Vargas? You're muted, sir.
Not used to Zoom anymore. Yeah, it is very disappointing. I don't want to reiterate what everybody's been saying already. I do want to thank staff for all their work behind all this. We've been at it for a while, and I would move to follow Lisa Sobek, and I would second her motion.
And Dr. Wilson.
Just to sort of reiterate some of the same things that staff has said and the sentiment that you've all shared, when this project was set to go forward and they had the money, the irony is, big picture, you had basically government dollars funding something, and the holdup was getting approval from other government agencies. When that went slower and slower, the timelines got, they really got to a point where they were in jeopardy. Staff went back to the funder, said, hey, we've got this issue with yet another government agency. We're trying to work it out, and we're able to get an extension specifically to get things going all the way up until we got to this point now. So despite all their efforts, it just wasn't meant to be. But I just wanted to assure you that the staff, they've been working this thing for years, and they've done everything they could possibly do to keep it on track.
And we have no more hands raised.
I'm gonna go ahead and throw a little my own side on this. Is that when many of these acts and agencies, and when we were putting together these organizations and cities and the county started participating, the the saying is that access to these lands, whether it be through trails or roads, would be something that was preserved. That was a promise that was made when folks were signing on. And it seems like whether it is by design or outright omission or purposeful misleading, that those promises have been broken repeatedly. I don't know what staff has done, and this is the question portion of what I'm going to say here. Have we talked to any of our federal elected officials with respect to whether or not they can go and maybe put some pressure on the agencies that are involved with this, and if it's specifically Fish and Wildlife? I wouldn't mind going ahead and having a conversation with a few congressmen, especially as we have some folks that are running for Senate here right now. It's a prime time to go ahead and maybe make this a political effort as opposed to a staff-led effort, if others were interested in pursuing that course.
I find that an interesting suggestion. What would that entail? Do you have in mind?
Well, within our city, we've not only met with elected officials in the past, but we've also hired folks that do the lobbying up in Washington, D.C. to actually influence certain decisions. I don't think that's a course of action we could take, because that'd be expensive and something that wouldn't be within the budget. But at the very least, conversation with a couple of our congressional elected officials that are running for re-election might not be a bad idea. Before we drop it, I mean, there's already money sunk. Why not throw a Hail Mary on that?
Can I jump in here real quick?
Yeah.
Brian, I'm sorry, hold on. Board member Sovek was speaking, but she's muted.
I'm sorry.
No. Okay, go ahead, Brian.
I just want to point out that they technically did not say no. What they did say is, well, first of all, they fundamentally disagree, as Rihanna said, with our definition of public facility. And within the implementation agreement for the SKRHCP, it is purposely left ambiguous. They mentioned transmission lines and roads and whatnot, but if you read the letter from the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, they take the strict definition that it mainly meant roads. And so our definition with our legal counsel and staff's definition includes trails. They disagree. So what they've done is said, okay, well, since it doesn't technically say that, then you have to do all these other things, including updating your management plan in CEQA analysis, a lot of other hurdles to overcome. They'll be very expensive for this agency. I like the political aspect of it, but in a sense, I want to also be cautioned. If you do pursue it and it does get approved, it will be either way, whether you have to do one-to-one mitigation and get to take coverage through the HCP, or if you go ahead and move forward with it, doing all the work that U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service wants you to. Just buying land has to be approved by the wildlife agencies. So say we go and we take out, I don't know, say an acre or two of land over there, Steel Peak, to put the trail in. We will have to buy an acre or two, if you can find only an acre or two, adjacent to that property from a willing seller, and then purchase that land, perhaps at a great expense. So I just want to say, either way, you're going to look at a lot more money being thrown at it. So just keep that in mind. If you want to push forward with it, by all means. We fought for 4 years just to give you this choice. They were very difficult in even coming to this letter. And we had to really push for it. The state still has not come with their letter. It was supposed to be a joint letter by both agencies, and that was really the hold up. It was bouncing back and forth between the two agencies. We finally just cornered U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service and just basically demanded the letter. So I just want to throw that out there. It will continue to be a great expense with either route if we are successful with it.
Board member Vargas.
Thank you. I was gonna suggest, I liked Steve Mano's suggestion, our chairs, but after hearing Brian, yeah, I'm not willing to gamble and waste that money. If it wasn't a straight out no, I mean, he's absolutely right. I mean, it's either way, it's gonna cost us money, so. That's my 2 cents.
Sounds that way. All right. All right, are there any other comments? Hearing none, we need a motion and a second to move this item forward. What is the pleasure of the agency?
I'd like to go with my recommendation again to put this on hold or on the back burner at this time.
And Paris had seconded that already.
We got a motion and a second. Any discussion to the motion? Seeing none, I'm watching for indications from Janice as I can't see what's happening. All right, so hearing none, all those in favor, we do a roll call.
Yes.
My apologies. So go ahead.
City of Corona,
Aye.
Emmett,
Yes.
Lake Elsinore,
Yes.
Menifee,
Aye.
Moreno Valley,
Yes.
Marietta,
Yes.
Paris,
Yes.
Riverside, Temecula,
Yes.
Willmar,
Yes.
Green County, Riverside. Thank you. That concludes roll call vote for that item, and it passes unanimously.
Thank you very much. We are going to move to item 6C. Item 6C is a presentation by Brian Shomo regarding the SKR Habitat Conservation Plan. Brian, you have the floor.
Brian, you're muted.
Thank you, Chairman. As you stated, item 6C is the future of the SKRHCP. Following on that discussion on 6B, kind of builds on this. So many of you know it is a 30-year permit. It technically expires in May of 2026. However, if the application for renewal occurs within 6 months of that expiration date, and the service and the Department of California Department of Fish and Wildlife take a long time to renew the permit, it continues as is, unabated. And so development, the Building and Industry Association, your cities, your county, all have certainty of take coverage moving forward, as long as we apply within 6 months of its expiration date. Seems like a long time, maybe not to some of you, knowing that the wheels of government turn very slowly. So we wanted just to basically start the discussion now. At the end of this, you'll see there's no action we're requesting at this time. This is mostly to begin the conversation, to kind of identify what we know and what we don't know. And so take your questions and maybe look into some of the more details, depending on what questions you may have, and kind of flesh out a path moving forward. Rather than renewing the HCP, there is another alternative, and it's something that probably will take place at some point in the future. Not necessarily now, but it should take place at some point in the future, and that is merging it with the Western Riverside Multiple Species Habitat Conservation Plan. Under that plan, it does contemplate it. It does say that an amendment will be required. That major amendment may require some level of CEQA, NEPA, and I should have defined that acronym for those of you who don't know. That's the federal version of CEQA. It stands for the National Environmental Policy Act, and it's very similar to our CEQA process here at the state level. It does, again, require concurrence by all of you, plus the United States Fish and Wildlife Service and the Department of Fish and Wildlife, the state. It would require transferring all of the RCHCA owned lands, the easements, the contracts, and everything over to the RCA. You would dissolve the SKR mitigation fee and an updated MSHCP fee, because you'll see I think it's the next slide, the SKRHCP provides take coverage to Stevens kangaroo rats, basically within our plan area, which sits in the middle of the Western Riverside MSHCP fee area. So it's kind of like a donut hole within the overall MSHCP. And so that would need to be filled in, and whether the existing fee could, MSHCP fee could do that, or if you'd have to update it, do another study and see how much it would have to increase, is all in question yet. The major pro to all this, to the merger, is that it really solidifies or combines two HCPs into one governing body. And again, as I said, at some point in the future, whether that's now or some point, these plans should be combined, and all the conserved land in Western Riverside should be managed under one entity. It just streamlines a lot of things. However, next slide. There are some cons, and I'm starting to sound like, it reminds me of Donald Rumsfeld. If any of you remember, former secretary, in 2002, he once said, you know, we know the known knowns and we know the unknown knowns. It's the unknown unknowns that we, you know, or care about. And so it's kind of where we're at today. We know there's pros, we know there's cons, and the next slide after this, we'll address some of the unknowns. But the cons that we know about right now are some of the legal issues. And so with those legal issues, the major amendments may involve opening up those plans, both plans. And by opening up, I mean, you have to amend them and to account for additional take, and that take may have to go through CEQA. And once it goes out for CEQA, then it could be challenged, and then other things could be added on, it could be litigated, that kind of thing. It's not something that we enter into lightly. Either agency would enter into lightly. You know, it does involve some risk once you start opening up the plans. The fee structure, again, would need to be updated. I think I touched on that on the previous slide. The MSHCP fee, again, would have to be restructured to account for that donut hole that would be left by the dissolution of the SKRHCP. And the SKR fee ordinance 663 would go away. There's some difference, well, major difference between how the two fees are structured. SKR fee charges a per acre fee. That fee hasn't been updated for 25 years. It's still $500 an acre for the most types of development. MSHCP kind of charges, as some of you know, to sit on our board, a per rooftop fee. That can change depending on whether it's residential or commercial, but essentially it's a per unit type fee. There is some question about whether the SKR fee and the MSHCP fees, if there's any restrictions on the use of those fees. In the past, we've had county counsel as well as attorneys from BB&K look into our fee. It's always been told to us that our fee predates the 66,000 government code. Essentially, from my understanding, again, I'm not an attorney here, but basically any fees that come after that have to be used for like capital projects and not for general fund administrative stuff. It's not very clear whether that's accurate or not. It's something we need to look into. And again, the SKR fee, the final bullet point is that we haven't increased it over 2 years, but it may have to increase if it's merged. So the unknowns. So the next slide, please. What are some of the unknowns that we need to look into? The Western Riverside plan states that the two plans shall require amendments to each plan. And again, those are potentially major amendments. We have asked our legal counsel to look into that. If they are major amendments, it would require some level of CEQA and NEPA. We don't know how much that would cost at this time or any of the potential legal challenges. Those are the unknown unknowns, to quote Donald Rumsfeld. Again, you need the concurrence of the wildlife agencies. I'm assuming they would concur as long as it's well structured and well, implemented. The merger, again, the Western Riverside MSHCP plans for this at some point in the future. If you read the SKR species objective portion of that plan, it does contemplate the merger of those two plans. It's just the timing has always been, when do you want to do it? So we need the concurrence again from the wildlife agencies. Just for an example of that, it may involve additional mitigation, additional conditions placed on the SKRHCP or the MSHCP, I should say. For instance, right now, the SKRHCP requires that only 15,000 acres of occupied habitat, but there's really no species objectives. We don't have to know how many are there. We just have to know that there's 15,000 acres of occupied habitat out there, which gets to that occupancy that we talked about in the recovery slide, that 30% occupancy for RCHCA. We just need to know that there's 15,000 acres of occupied habitat out there somewhere. The MSHCP has a higher threshold, a higher bar that you have to jump. It talks about occupancy and a density requirement, so how many there are per area, more or less. And so if you move all the SKR reserve system and all the RCHCA lands into the Western Riverside MSHCP, does that barrier for recovery increase at this point? We don't know. And so that's some of the unknowns we need to look for. Next slide. Again, it is a receive and file. This is just starting to take a look at it. I'd be happy to take any questions and answer anything I can at this point. or just to write down your questions that I don't know about, and that we can provide to you at the next meeting, where we will probably ask you for some guidance on which direction you want to take. There is a hybrid version of this. You can renew it, renew the SKRHCP. For example, you can cancel that at any time. We'll probably wind up recommending a hybrid option. If you want to move ahead with some kind of merger outlook, you do the hybrid option and renew it, and then take your time, look into what's all involved in merging those two, what the fee would have to go to. RCA needs to agree to all this as well. So, but those are just some of our first thoughts. And again, it's just the beginning of the conversation. So it is a receive and file. I'd be happy to take any questions that you may have.
Thank you, Brian. Do we have any questions or comments from the public at this time?
No, sir.
Anybody on the agency wish to speak to this item?
We have board member Morabito, followed by Dr. Wilson.
Yeah, I'm on RCA also, and haven't had a chance to do a meeting with the executive committee on there yet, but I'm on that also. And I know that we should explore, the future of both of these agencies and see if there's any reasonability in putting the two together. So that's my thought.
Thank you, sir.
Dr. Wilson?
Thank you. So just a quick update to that. So with respect to RCA, Ann and Aaron and I have been in conversation about this. So they're still wrapping their heads around it as well. So they don't have any, they don't currently have an opinion one way or the other about any of this, but they are aware of the issue, and they're looking at it, and they've committed to stay engaged with us as we sort of work through the process to figure out what makes the most sense. And with respect to timing, just to reiterate what Brian said, so we've got to get we've got to get sort of the renewal request in within 6 months of that May 2026 date. I would recommend going forward with that regardless of what the other conversation is like. And then in addition to that, because we're coming up on a presidential election year and things get a little strange, I would advocate for doing it early, so that in the hopefully unlikely event that the rules change on us, we will have already checked that box before we get into that piece there. And the final piece is timing of things. So as Brian said, at some point, this is likely to be something that happens. The question is whether it's something now or at some point in the future. One natural transition point could be the renewal of the HCP, but another natural transition point could be completing the work that's well underway for essentially delisting the species to begin with.
Thank you, sir. Any other speakers?
No, sir.
I got a question. Oh, sorry.
I don't know how to raise my hand in the thing, so in the queue. So I do have a question. So I like the idea of combining these two groups together for sure. Will the state and the feds allow us to do it is the question. That's where I'm kind of like, is it something that they're going to say, oh no, or is this a viable option?
It is a viable option. It has been done before. The Coachella Valley Plan has merged with the Fringe Toed Lizard Habitat Conservation Plan, another single species plan, a long time ago. So it's not new, as long as it's done in an orderly fashion, and they can be assured that the conservation values of the RCHCA would continue in the Western Riverside MSHCP. I think they would be on board with it. Whether they add new conditions or not is another matter entirely. And we have begun conversations with them, and they are thinking about it. At this time, they don't have any wish or desire, if we go with the straight renewal, to add any further conditions on. I don't know if that's necessarily true if we start merging plans and stuff like that, or opening plans up. And so that's something that's one of those unknown unknowns that we need to, or unknown that we need to look into further. But yes, I think they would be on board with it if it's done in a orderly fashion, and they could be assured that the protection.
I'm all about simplifying government, and this sounds like a nice simplification. So I'm for it.
Thank you, sir. Brian, and I'm also all for streamlining government. I like that. But how many HCPs have actually been effective in reducing or bringing an endangered population back from endangered to threatened or to no longer endangered?
How many HCPs? I think we're the first one. There have been other delisted species, but not as a result of an HCP. So the HCP is definitely doing its job. I would say we are the first ones. One of the first HCPs developed and one of the first ones to recover or to downlist a species.
I find it interesting that the conversations about merging us into their unit, I know that they've had lawsuits and some, big problems in terms of amassing the conservation lands and some of the fees and whether they're funded properly to go ahead and do so, especially as it relates to the way our funding works versus the way their funding works. So I find it interesting that the conversations about merging our organization into their organization, when they seem to have a lot of problems and we seem to be an effective organization that has a more protected fee structure. And then the idea of opening up the HCPs for CEQA and legal challenges, you will have every builder in the region. You'll have cities that probably won't want to continue forward. I mean, it would be a full probably review of the organizational structure, whether it's effective, and I tell you, I see knife fight after knife fight, and then that doesn't even take into account the federal and state bodies. It's just, we could get all the way down and open up Pandora's box, and they're just, and then they want to place, different standards, and they're known for moving goalposts. So, this is a big one. You know what I mean? That seems to be a very, very scary thing to go ahead and venture down, but appreciate the presentation.
Board Member Sobek?
Thank you. I would just like to, Mr. Manos, I serve on both the RCHCA and the RCA with Riverside County and have served on the executive board there. And since we've gone through the process of moving into RCTC from the county, we've had a lot of positive movement. There, you mentioned you kind of flew out their lawsuits and this and that, but I will say that as Brian shared, that if we do it right and we follow and we have procedures and we put things in place, I have been very impressed with the new leadership that we have received and the way we've been able to move things forward in a positive way. I've always thought, serving on both, I was always wondering why we weren't just one in Riverside County. I understand it was probably a little political, and it will probably become political again. But I think if we can look at the big picture, what is best for Riverside County and our developers to be able to keep developing and not have the hurdles to go through, I believe we do need to look at how we can merge this and save money, streamline the process, and make it all successful. So that was just my 2 cents.
Fair enough. I think if I remember correctly, correct me, I think the mandate for the SKR came out way before the species, the mandates for the species, endangered species and flora and fauna that are covered under MSHCP. They're just developed during 2 different time periods. And that's probably, I think that's why they're separate. But yeah, very interesting conversation. Brian, you have anything to add?
I just want to add that this isn't the first time this has been brought up to both of our boards. A lot of that information that you've seen presented to you was contemplated 15 years ago. It's not something new that, it's just nobody's ever moved forward with it. I think as Member Sobek said, as long as it's planned, it could be done successfully. I think that the RCA and RCHCA are really in 2 different places at this point. The RCHCA is really into management and recovering SKR. The RCA is still in the acquisition phase, as they should be, and not focused on so much management of the habitat. There is a natural break. I think, according to the MSHCP, they're supposed to be done with their acquisitions in 2030. I think they're a little bit behind. I'm not sure. I'm not gonna, don't quote me on that, but the acquisition, according to the MSHCP, is supposed to be done in 2030. So there could be a timeline, and it would give us ample time moving forward to kind of develop a strategy, a plan. Does it take a major amendment? Would it have to go through? If it's just a minor amendment, then maybe both boards can take an action and that's it. We really don't know, and that's the thing. We don't know the process, and so we want to be deliberate in our actions, and we want to move forward at a steady pace and do our due diligence. And so I think that's what I'm hearing from the board. We will certainly keep looking into this and have hopefully much more information at the May meeting for you.
Board member Sobek, did you have your hand raised again?
I just was going to agree with the acquisition of land, and a little bit behind due to the state and the feds not contributing their fair share, but they have had some movement on that, and they have been able to work a little bit more, and we've seen positive movement. We also have Congressman Calvert and another congressman that are really working with us to acquire some habitat land to help the plan. So.
Okay, well, very good. Any other comments, questions? This is receive and file, so we're going to move on. Report from our executive director, Dr. Kurt Wilson. You're on deck.
Well, thank you, but I have no report today. Thank you.
If we were all gathered in the room, we'd probably all stand and applaud you for that. Okay. Item number 8, items for future agenda. Are there any requests for items for future agendas? Hearing none, seeing none. We're going to move on to item number 9, general announcements. Do any of the board members have any general announcements they'd like to make at this time? So I'm not seeing or hearing any. So we're going to go ahead and next meeting for the board of directors is scheduled for Thursday, May 9th, 2024 at 11:30 a.m. in WRCOG's office at 3390 University Avenue, Suite 200, Riverside. Ladies and gentlemen, we are adjourned.